Welcome to Greek for a Week. This week we are looking at a diagram of Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. Again, we're still within Paul's letter here, where I would claim it's the body of the letter. And this is Paul's circumstances and then, of course, the spread of the gospel. So this paragraph again is verses 12 through 26, but I stopped at 18. And so this week will be 12 through 18. And then next week we'll look at the latter half of verse 18 and 19. And then we'll move forward and look at the rest of the verses. And then, of course, diagram verse 18 through 26. So you'll see the Greek text here. Again, I've been through all of these verses, so I won't go back through them. So let's look at our diagram. Again, Paul begins verse 12. He says, I want you to know. That's a typical formula that Paul uses in most, if not all of his letters. There is a form of knowledge, or I don't want you to be ignorant. So that type of formula begins the body section. So he has a desire, and then the to know there would be a complementary infinitive. It completes the thought of the verb, which is boulamai, I want or I wish you to know, brothers, and there's the vocative, that. And so this is a hina of content, that which is according to me has arrived for, and here's ace, probably indicating goal. So the goal of Paul's circumstances, that's which is according to me, or that which has happened to me. It ultimately has been for the greater progress of the gospel. Now the result of arriving, or those things that have happened to Paul as they have come toward him, or they have been a part of his life. Not only has there been a goal for the greater progress of the gospel, but the result is that his imprisonment, what has happened, where it has been evident that his progress of the gospel, his imprisonment because of Christ and his relationship to Christ, these particular people have heard or known the gospel. And then he says, many brethren, being confident in the Lord, by the means of his imprisonment. The result, if you will, of this confidence is to have far more courage and to have that without fear. And then a complementary infinitive, being confident of what? To speak the word. So his imprisonment has not only brought a greater progress of the gospel, but it's also provided many brethren with courage to preach the word. Now, on the one hand, some are preaching Christ because of envy and strife. But on the other hand, some also are preaching Christ because of good pleasure. You can see our Mende construction here. That's why you have on the one hand, and then you have on the other hand. Now verse 16, Paul's going to continue here. Again, those on the one hand, they preach Christ out of love because they know that Paul is appointed, again, ace goal for the goal of the defense of the gospel. And then those on the other hand, again, another Mende construction here. Those on the other hand, they preach Christ. They do it rather than out of love. They do it out of selfish ambition and not sincerely, because they are thinking that they can raise some kind of affliction against Paul in his imprisonment. Then what? So Paul kind of wraps things up here in verse 18 with a then what? Well, he says, except that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached. And because of this, en tuto, because of this, I rejoice. So ultimately, Paul is rejoicing, and he's rejoicing because Christ is being preached in every way, in truth or in pretense. The gospel is moving forward. So how might we look at this to, again, to teach this particular section? Again, it's a little bit odd because I think there's some illustration or some expansion of what Paul's discussing when he uses his mende relationships there, those grammatical constructions. So Paul desires that they know. So I think one of the main points is Paul wants them to know something. He doesn't want them to be ignorant of, I would say, he doesn't want them to be ignorant of the fact that the gospel is moving forward. And it's moving forward ultimately because of his circumstances. Again, why is he mentioning this? Because, right, they are sending gifts, they are sending food, they are sending the necessary things for Paul. So it is a church that is caring for him. And even despite those circumstances, Paul says, hey, I want you to know the gospel is still moving forward. So he desires that they know. The content then of the Philippians knowledge is that Paul's circumstances here brought greater progress for the gospel, and with the result that many heard the gospel. And another result, that's the chi there in verse 14, and with the result that many have confidence to speak the word. Paul provides an illustration then of those preaching in verses 15 through 17. Some preach Christ selfishly, some preach Christ with pleasure. Those that do it with pleasure, they do it out of love. And then those that do it selfishly, they do it to afflict Paul in prison. And then lastly, Paul rejoices because either way, the gospel is preached. So 3 main points here. Paul desires, Paul provides, and Paul rejoices. So next week, we will look at the second half of verse 18 and more than likely verse 19 and continue to move forward till we wrap things up at verse 26. Have a great week.